Hi everyone, welcome to our monthly webinar. I'm Thierry van Acton and next to me I have Crystal. Crystal wrote the month report. I hope you all read it already. It was about how to monetize your app and especially top apps. We looked at different angles on this metric, so we looked at countries and categories and devices. And we're going into more details during this webinar.
We'll share some additional insights. So also hello from my side. The first question is always, can you all hear us already? You could just give us a short answer in the chat box. And we can start to continue once everyone has joined.
So can everybody hear us? Yes,
okay.
We got some responses. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Crystal will speak up a bit, but I'll give the word first to Thierry to start with an overview about Distimo.
Yeah, so for everyone that does not know Distimo yet, we're an app analytic company. We got an awesome tool to track your own apps. There are a lot of free features in there, for example, tracking your reviews, tracking ratings. You can also track rankings for your competitors for free. We have an SDK where you can track conversion. Everything is available through the API. It's all for free. And we got our huge premium product, which is App IQ, where we estimate download and revenues per app for the three major app stores, Apple App Store, Google Play, and the Amazon App Store. All the findings that we have are directly pulled from App IQ, so they're all estimations, and that makes us able to get these kind of reports and say something about the whole market, but also say something about specific applications. We will start with the major findings of the report, and later on I will show you some AppIQ data and see how you can monetize your app the best. So first things first, Crystal, what kind of business models are there around on the globe?
Yeah, that's the major question that was behind this report in regards to monetization. Another short general note for you, all these slides will be available next Monday, and we will also post the link to a recording of this webinar, so you can check it out later for your reference. So your question was, what are the main business models behind the revenue? Yeah, we kind of got a lot of follow-up questions from our yearly report, and we wanted to give you more a global picture how the different business models kind of stand right now in the different countries. Here we're looking at 10 countries as a selection to give you an insight on the different markets, Western markets and Asian markets, and in purple you see the revenue share of free apps with in-app purchases, and that's clearly the majority. We see that over all the countries. Starting with the Asian countries, they have the highest coverage of this business model. It means most of their revenue really comes from the free apps with the freemium features. And when we go more over to the US, France, Canada, Australia, there you already see that paid apps and also paid apps with in-app purchases have already a larger share of the revenue, but then closing these 10 countries, Germany actually shows one of the highest percentages of paid apps without in-app purchases and also paid apps with in-app purchases. What does that show us? It really means that kind of the Germans and maybe also the people in the UK have a higher preference for still spending money on paid apps and not just trying out free apps. And when we look at this kind of data, we also ask, like, why is that? What apps are behind that? And maybe to give you another perspective on this, this is a graph that was featured in our Year in Review 2013 publication, and there you kind of see the same picture. So again, purple for free apps with in-app purchases, but now we see it by category. And you see maybe games at the top and newsstand and news. These are really, again, the categories that have the highest revenue share from the freemium features. For news, you can think of ads with subscription-based models like magazines that have a news abonnement and stuff like that. But on the other hand, then in red, you see the paid apps without in-app purchases, and those show really high revenue share in categories like education, productivity, and navigation at the bottom part of the graph. And that really is interesting to see. With navigation, I think we've seen some of the most expensive apps that people just buy once and then continue using it without unlocking further free features or other additional tools within the app. And especially this category, the navigation productivity category, are very popular in Germany, and that explains then, if you go back to the previous slide again, the relatively higher percentage in revenue from this business model. So this is really it in terms of business models. But what apps really monetize well and how do they monetize well, that's another point that we wanted to look at in this publication. And we really, Thierry mentioned it, with App IQ, we estimate the downloads and revenues, and we wanted to give you an insight of the relation between these two factors on a mostly global picture, and also show you some specific example in this webinar. So as we can see here, we look at our top 10 countries again, and now look at it from the average revenue per download perspective. That means we looked at a certain time frame, in this case January 2012 to January 2014, and had a different sample of the top 250 grossing apps for each of these countries. And we basically divided all of the revenue that these apps generated by all of the downloads that were generated for these apps, and this is the average revenue that is really possible in these markets. So you can kind of compare the different countries, and we've already seen that it can differ for the different categories in terms of revenue, but this is a broad sample just from the top overall, so it includes games, of course, but it also includes other categories, and it gives you a broad average benchmark really to see where people are spending relatively more or less per download. So you see the leading countries are really, again, Asia. Japan, Australia, South Korea have an average revenue per download or ARPD far over $3. And then we kind of identified this other group with Canada, Germany, US, and UK that are mainly in the middle, all around $2.30. And then Russia and China are relatively lower. It means people don't really spend that much per download in these countries.
So the revenue per download metric is one of the key metrics for app developers, but also for decision makers. Can you tell me something about differences among devices? So is there a difference between tablets and mobile phones?
Yeah, that was also a different interesting perspective. So further, we wanted to really investigate that with our sample, and we focused here on the Apple App Store and looked at the difference between iPad and iPhone. And it's the same countries that we looked at, but you really see a difference between the two devices on the iOS platform. We really saw in general overall the iPad spend per download was overall higher, and it's interesting to see this, how much higher it can even be. Like in Japan, we see a difference between $5 and over $7, so that's almost $2 difference. But then to again take this data kind of with a grain of salt, when you know this distribution, this slide will show you the revenue distribution on iOS. You really see that the majority of revenue, though, is made on iPhone. So, for example, especially for Japan, this is a big difference. So iPhone makes 91% of the revenue, even though the relative revenue per download was higher on iPad. So what does that mean? I think the people who have the money to invest into a tablet then spend relatively more on their games, but it is the minority in these markets. And I think the only country where iPad overall monetizes better than iPhone was Russia in the sample. it's also interesting to see. And then again, towards the end, it's 50-50. But in the Asian markets, where really the most revenue is at, and also where the highest ARPDs we're seeing, we see that iPhone revenue is still the higher volume.
So what you're more or less saying is that people are willing to pay more on a big device, let's say an iPad in this case, instead of a small phone device.
Relatively per download, yes, but in general, the most revenue is still generated on the iPhone.
Yeah. And what can you tell us when you combine other kind of metrics like cost per install?
Yeah, so in this report, it was interesting to take a look at the industry and kind of put ourselves in the shoes of a developer and see what kind of metrics are interesting for a developer perspective in terms of revenue potential in different markets. So for this report, we actually shared some data with Chartboost, and they got back to us with some of their average data on cost per install, and that you can see in green on this graph. So for this, we adjusted our sample to only look at games, since Chartboost only covers games in their network, and yeah, basically enables promotion of games and in these kind of campaigns, and the average cost per install per country is seen here in green. And if we compare that with our sample of games, we could kind of identify the largest markets for the game sector in this time frame. So what we could see again, you could see it on the right already, Japan was again leading, and also Australia had a huge ARPD of $4.50. And the 5 markets that we really could identify cross-referencing these data points were Japan, Australia, South Korea in the Asian markets, and then the UK and also the US. But again, Japan really promised the most revenue potential. When you really see it like this, kind of, you have to invest $1.86 for an install on average, and our potential based on our estimates that we kind of calculate is $6.34, which would give you a potential profit of $4.48 per download, which is still really huge. Yeah, and I think in general we really enjoyed this analysis and like to reference these points, but I think this can always differ among different categories or time frames, kind of going back to the introduction. And one example that shows that really well was the app that we chose in our publication. We looked at Jewel Mania here in terms of average revenue per download, ARPD. And even for the same app, we initially thought, well, they might have like a similar user base, or the spend behavior per user might be the same for the same app. But even here, we see that in different markets, the relative spend per download per user can vary very much. So we saw for Jewel Mania, I guess it's very popular in Australia. People seem to enjoy that being there and spend a lot of money per download on it, with $6.65 on average. And this is referencing data for the last quarter in 2013. And then other countries like Germany and Italy or France were only at $1 something, like France was $1.44. So you can really see on this map how the different markets behave. I think we just got some questions. Let's take a look. Yeah, this is a question about where the customer acquisition spend is going. I'm afraid this is really not our focus of interest, but we will get back to you with potential data points per email. But really the advertisement spend was just a one-time look at the other industry metrics with the CPI data here from Chartboost. This is not data that we usually estimate or analyze in our publications. But maybe I can continue with Jewel Mania as well. One question that I received is, okay, I see it's the same app, it's the same kind of time frame, but how does the average revenue per download develop over time? And this is some additional data that we wanted to share in this webinar with you. So we chose the same app, where we already know it behaves different in different countries. And here I looked at the same country, so only Canada, and you see the time frame for the whole year of 2013. And you see this app was actually released late in 2012, I think in November. And then you see at the beginning of 2013, the average revenue per download was really low at around 70 cents, which means in the beginning of the release of an app, probably a lot of people will just download it. So it will show relatively higher download numbers for people exploring the app, trying it out for the first time. And then eventually you see this nice increase where the revenue, the average revenue per download, goes up. We'll see some drops and falls and rises again, so that can also be different for every app, for every country. But then we see in September, so almost a year after release, it reached the highest point at $4.15. And then in November, exactly a year after the app was released, the average revenue per download went down here to $2. And then in December, it picked up again, which can likely be related to the holiday business when more people like explore apps and play them for the first time on the new phone, or things like what we analyzed previously with the Christmas bag. So I think these examples can really show you how different apps behave in different markets, and of course some of this might be really game focused, but for developers developing any kind of app, it's really important to look at these kind of metrics of similar apps. So in terms of business model, is it a free app, is it a paid app? In terms of the device, definitely in terms of the market and the characteristics for the market, and even the time frame. So I think hopefully knowing that these insights exist here can help you to determine the best strategy for any individual app of your interest in order to increase possible revenue potential. And this is mainly what we wanted to fulfill with this publication. And I think now I would like to give the word back to Thierry to show you actually some insights from our AppIQ tool and show you a few other examples of downloads and revenues that we have in our estimates.
So in the meanwhile, I will answer a quick question about South Africa. We support some countries in South Africa: Brazil, Uruguay, Colombia, Argentina, I think, Peru. We didn't include those countries in this research, but we see huge opportunity over there, especially in Brazil, because that's already a big market. But also the growth figures for the other countries are impressive, but keep in mind, especially the revenue level is really low there, but the growth numbers are really impressive in countries like Argentina, Uruguay, and
Uruguay. If you follow our blog, we'll have recent updates on that in some of our publications with growth rates or the development of these markets. But just to give you a relation, these countries that we covered are actually the top 10 revenue generating countries, and the revenue in Russia is about 8% of what it's made in the US at the moment. So if you had all of these same countries at the same scale, some of them would be very low, disappearing in the graph. That's why we didn't compare all these countries in this analysis. Let's go to AppIQ.
Yeah, so do some live demo here. So I already entered our analytic tool where you can track your own app for free, but you can also sign up for our premium product, which is AppIQ, where we have these estimations, download revenue estimations for Amazon App Store, the Apple App Store, and Google Play. Let me start by looking at our leaderboards. So here you see top apps in certain categories, certain countries. And in this case, I pulled out the monthly leaderboard of January 2014, and I'll look at the casino category. So we got the big app here, Big Fish, but that's not the one that I want to look at now at this moment. I did some study here about another Big Fish app, Big Fish Bingo, and when you click on the name, you see the top 10 countries pop up, and you see automatically the downloads and revenue numbers there, and that makes it very easy to have a look at the revenue per download. And when you divide the revenue by the downloads, you get 3.2 for the US, which is a decent number, I think. For Canada, it's $2 per download, $2.4 per download, and then going to, for example, Japan, it's only $1.3 per download. So for this particular app, it monetizes okay, relatively in Japan, but not as good as this in the United States. So looking at a different app, a different bingo app. So this is Bingo Blingo, published by SGN. You see the same top countries at the top, so the United States, Australia, the UK, Canada, and they also the revenue per download are pretty much the same except for Japan. Japan, which is ranked number 7. Japan has a revenue per download of 3.3, which is way higher than the revenue per download for the Big Fish bingo app. The revenue per download for the United States is pretty much the same compared to the Big Fish bingo. It's 4.6, so a little bit higher in that case. With these leaderboards, it's very easy to do these kind of calculations and see how your competitors or how interesting apps monetize based on revenue per download. And we have these leaderboards not only for apps, but we also aggregate these leaderboards per publisher. So when I go here to publisher, it will give me the top list for all the publishers that are ranked in the games casino category on the Apple App Store, and it's iPhone, iPad combined. We also have these leaderboards separate for only iPhone or only iPad. And for this little research, I looked at a Big Fish again, or not. So this Big Fish only published 2 apps in this casino category. But of course we are more interested in all the games that Big Fish are publishing. So we go to all games. It's Big Fish is here. So now I got the top 10 best apps of Big Fish in terms of revenue. And the thing that I found really interesting is, of course, the Fairway Solitaire HD. Which is ranked number 6. This app has just 1,500 downloads, but it monetized pretty well with this low volume of downloads. In
the HD is usually always referring to the iPad app, right?
That's true. That's correct. And this is also a paid app, so it's a full version of the game. So it's a paid app, and therefore the revenue per download, which is enormous. It's 42 USD per download for this app, and that's because it's a paid app. And paid apps normally monetize better relatively to downloads.
Yeah, so also in line with the sample that we analyzed in the report.
Yeah.
Maybe an extreme, but that definitely brings the average up.
Yeah. So the funniest thing about this top 10 list, we see different kind of Fairway apps. So also on rank 2 and also on rank 4 we see the same app, but on rank 2 it's HD, which is of course only available on iPad, and on rank 4 we see the original version of Fairway, which is mostly downloaded on iPhone. And when you compare the revenue per download of these 2 apps, you see that for the HD version, the revenue per download is 8.7, and for the original version, the revenue per download is 5.5. That means that, according to our findings, iPad is monetizing better compared to downloads, than the iPhone. That does not mean that you make more money on the iPad. It only means that you have more revenue per download on that device.
So you always need to take your whole volume and sales into consideration to make a rational decision there.
Correct. So these leaderboards, we support all these kind of countries. We even support all countries together, so you get a nice overview how well Puzzle & Dragons is performing compared to Candy Crush, for example, globally. We have it for top apps, we have the top publishers. We have it for daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly periods. And also, for example, if there are some investors out there, our quarterly leaderboards will be available, let's say 5 days after the end of the quarter, so that's way before earnings are called. So that's a big advantage of this tool. If there are any questions regarding FAQ or the publication, please ask us now, because then we are able to still reply on that one.
If not, we will definitely follow up by email after the webinar, and the slides will be available online, posted next week on Monday. And yeah, we look forward to hearing your feedback as always.
So no question now, so I think we're going to end the session. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you next month, because then we have another webinar about our monthly publication, and we give some free data in our analytic tool. Thank you.